I am here, and happy Friday to everyone out there in TV land and Detroit and all over the world, courtesy of the World Wide Web. I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'm with a person who, well, it took us years to meet, but we definitely do have a great connection, and so much history is tied up into this show this hour. And don't forget to watch Table Talk next hour, because we're going to be dealing with a lot of the latest issues with Ellis Liddell and Daryl Buchanan. I am so excited to introduce to you, if you don't know him, you better know him. This is Mr. Daniel Baxter. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Brenda.
How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm exceeding expectations on this morning. How about that?
Oh, great. Well, I tell you, Daniel, what do you?
Daniel, I like Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel. I always think of Daniel in the Lion's Den or something. Isn't there something?
Thank God he got delivered, huh?
He got delivered.
All right.
But Daniel is the owner of the Sweet House, the Ossian Sweet House. And you might remember a few years ago, I did a play about the Sweet trial. Dr. Ossian Sweet was a doctor who moved into 2905 Garland Street on the city's east side when it was all white, and the white neighbors gathered around and they started stoning the house, and someone within the house shot outside and killed one of the white men. And then a trial started and so forth, and we're going to get into all of that. But I'm so excited to have Daniel here because he grew up in that house. Good. There's so much to say and do. So you were born in that house, right?
Yes, I was born on September 23rd, 1965.
Gee.
Right on the corner of Garland and Charlottesville. But before we get into it, just let me say this. It is definitely a delight and a plum pleasing pleasure to be here with you. We connected some years ago.
Yes. And then you moved out of town. I
moved out of town. I went to Montgomery, Alabama, and I came back to Detroit in 2015, and it was certainly a pleasure, and it's been just a bonus to have made your acquaintance and
same here.
Lockstep.
Same here. We
have the same interests.
Right.
The Ossian Sweet House.
Right.
And I remember when you did the play some years ago, I was just so pleased and excited about it because I knew that that would be one of the catalysts that would perpetuate the momentum for the Sweet House to get the national recognition that it deserves.
Well, it's going to get even more national recognition because it's going to be made into a museum.
That's
turned
correct.
Into a museum, right?
That's correct.
Well, let's talk a little history. I don't know which way you want to go on this, but I do want the audience to be familiar with it because when it happened, that made international news in 1925.
1925, yep. On September 8th, 1925, a young African-American physician by the name of Dr. Ossian Sweet moved his family into the house in the modest bungalow on the corner of Garland and Charlevoix. He, his wife Gladys, his brother Henry, and his brother Otis, along with 7 other friends, moved into the house. And on that day, just in case the Neighborhood Welcome Association brought something other than apple pie, they brought guns with them.
Right.
With the intent to make sure that if anything happened on that corner that day, they would be equipped to defend themselves.
Well, you know, from my research, and what you're saying is absolutely correct, of course. What was happening too, because they had a daughter named Iva. Gladys, his wife was Gladys. The baby daughter, was Iva. And these people will walk up and down the street, passing the house all day long. And his main reason for moving over there, he wanted a nice house and a nice neighborhood, and it was across the street from a school that had a playground.
That's right. You know, when they asked Dr. Sweet, well, Sweet, why did you buy that house on Garland? He said, all I wanted to do was to ensure that my baby girl, Iva, grew up in nice surroundings. And that's what it was about. As you stated, there was the Howe Elementary School right across the street. It was a nice neighborhood. But there was something else that drew him to that neighborhood. Eastern Europeans
Yes.
lived in that community. As you know, that was the era of the first Great Migration.
Yes.
Not only did African Americans
Yes.
come from the South, whites with their racist attitudes.
And Black Bottom
That's
was white at one time.
That's right. That's right. And Eastern Europeans came because they wanted to flee from those tyrannical governments and engaged in that promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that was the Eastern European community. And Dr. Sweet chose that specifically for that reason, because he believed that those people, those Eastern Europeans, could really affiliate or understand the plight of black folk. And as such, he thought that that would be a great strategy to move in that community for that particular reason.
Well, I think, Daniel, we should let the audience know what Detroit was about in those times, because, you know, the Ku Klux Klan was here.
That's right. In fact, I would believe that at that particular time, Detroit had the highest population of members of the Ku Klux Klan. So Detroit was a hodgepodge of so many different things. As you know, in the 1920s, that was called the Gilded Era. It was also called the Harlem Renaissance. It was called the Ragtime.
Right.
There was a lot of things going on. Being black was in vogue. However, when it came to housing and when it came to equal rights, that wasn't the case. When you dealt with entertainment, music, literature, and all of those cultural paradigms, black was beautiful. But if you moved into a white neighborhood, it was all about black staying back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as more blacks moved into the Black Bottom area, what streets was that? Hastings Street?
That was Hastings Streets, Mount Elliott. It was bounded by, I believe, John R., right in the Woodward area, as far south as Jefferson, and as far north as West Grand as far as north as the Boulevard.
Oh, I didn't realize it was
Portions
that
of it
far.
did, but it was mainly concentrated right there in that Mac area.
But as more blacks moved over there, the city services turned into nothing.
Oh, it was horrific.
Sewerage was bad. I mean, it was just terrible. No street lights, which reminded me of Detroit a few years ago, remember?
Yeah.
And people were, there was a great migration of our people.
That's right.
Because of Ford Motor Company, the plants were opening and so forth.
$5 a day job drew a lot of people to the city of Detroit. And one of the other interesting things was just before that, in that year, you had a member of the Ku Klux Klan who ran for mayor of the city of Detroit.
Absolutely, yes.
I think his name was Bowles.
Yes.
And he lost the election. He was a write-in candidate.
He was a write-in candidate. People spelled his name wrong.
He won the election by write-in votes, but when the Board of Canvassers began to review the ballots, they threw out all of the votes for him in which his name was misspelled.
It's misspelled.
That's right.
Whew.
Right.
You know, it was something because the Ku Klux Klan ran their own candidate. And let's talk about things that were happening to the doctor. There was the Tireman Improvement Association over near Tireman Street on the west side.
Right.
And let's talk about what they were doing.
So on the west side, there were two incidents, one on Stopel Street, one on Spokane, and even one on American Street, where African Americans moved into all-white neighborhoods. On Spokane Street, a gentleman by the name of Dr. A.L. Turner moved into a home, and the Tireman Improvement Association gathered around his house. It was about 800 to 1,000 folk. They destroyed his house.
And the police did nothing.
Did absolutely
nothing.
Did absolutely nothing. They gathered around his house and destroyed it. I mean, broke out every window. And then once they had terrorized the family, they went in the house, took out all of the furniture, brought Dr. Turner out of the house, put him on his knees, put a gun to his head, and made him sign the deed to the house over to the Improvement Association.
Right.
And because of that success, they tried that every time black folk moved into a neighborhood. And when they heard about Dr. Sweet moving in on Garland, the first thing that they did was they started coming over to that particular community, knocking on doors telling the folks, you know, black people are about to move in. The value of your home is about to depreciate, and you better make sure you keep an eye on your daughters. That summer, they scheduled a town hall meeting, if you will, at Howe Elementary School. And on that day, they said that the record states that it was so crowded they had to move out of the auditorium and outside into the playfield, right?
Right.
The keynote speaker was a gentleman from the Tireman Improvement Association.
Right.
And the biggest applause came when this guy said, when the nigger rears his head in our community, it is the responsibility of the white man to shoot.
That's the truth. That is the truth. And, you know, they knew they had the police officers on their side. And, you know, one of the people who was in the house with Dr. Sweet was, I forgot the gentleman's name, but he was actually a Detroit police officer, a narcotics officer.
He's a narcotics detective.
And he tried to get, after everything happened, he really tried to get out of it. And, but yes, he was a police officer. One of Dr. Sweet's brothers was a college student at, Henry Sweet was a college student at Wilberforce. Yeah. And then his other brother was a dentist. Otis Sweet was a dentist.
Yep, he graduated from Meharry.
Right, right. And see, let's talk about Dr. Sweet when he was a little boy, what he saw.
So, Dr. Sweet and his family, they lived in Bartow, Florida.
Right.
The interesting thing was that when Dr. Sweet was cross-examined, they asked him, what did you think when you saw the mob? And that's when Dr. Sweet said, when I opened the door and I saw the mob, I realized that I was facing the same mob that had hounded my people throughout its entire history. In my mind, I was pretty confident of what I was up against. I had my back against the wall, and I was filled with a peculiar fear, the fear of one who knows the history of my race. And then Dr. Sweet gave a dissertation of the challenges and struggles that African Americans had experienced since being here in the United States of America. And then he went on to tell the story about when he was a little boy in Bartow on his way home one evening. And he saw a lynch mob.
Right.
And they had a black man. And they lynched him, and then they burned him to death. So he told that story. And that story in and of itself was the magic moment, if you will,
the
in
catalyst.
That particular trial. Because at that moment he gave those 12 white men an opportunity to look out of the corner of Garland and Charlevoix through black eyes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And the jury, well, let's kind of get into what happened that particular day. He had come home, he had brought weapons. He had, there were 11 of them in the house, 11 people in the house. And the white people started gathering around the house and so forth. I have a video of the 2020 report that Channel 7 did that can give a little overview of what happened that day. So when Sean wants to get that on.
The story begins on Garland Street one hot September night in 1925. Dr. Ocean Sweet, a black physician, bought this house in the all-white East Side neighborhood. He had just moved in with his wife and young daughter. 500 angry neighbors gathered on Garland Street to let the new family know they were not welcome.
People were outside of their homes. They were milling around. Cars were parked 3 deep. So imagine being in that house when those hundreds of people gathered around.
Dr. Sweet's 2 brothers, a local dentist and a college student, were at the house. So were 7 other men. There had been warnings that trouble was likely, so the men were armed.
I believe they did know that they were making a stand, that whatever happened, they were going to defend his legally purchased home.
When rocks began pelting the home, shots were fired from inside. One man in the street was killed, another wounded. Police arrested all 11 adults in the house.
They stayed in jail 84 days and they had the trial, and it was a hung jury.
What happened next was the basis for the book Arc of Justice.
Trouble finds you.
and the book was the basis for a play written and directed by Detroiter Brenda Perryman. The play is a dramatization of the second trial. This time, only Dr. Sweet's brother Henry was tried. He admitted to police he fired a weapon.
I looked at all those people.
What did you do then?
Well, I tried to protect myself.
Then what happened?
Well, I fired my rifle.
If Henry was found guilty, that meant all 11 were found guilty.
The defense attorney was the nationally renowned Clarence Darrow, who had been persuaded by the NAACP to take the case. And the judge was Frank Murphy, who later became Detroit mayor, Michigan governor, and U.S. Supreme Court justice. William Giovon is portraying Frank Murphy in the play.
Frank Murphy was a legal and civil rights icon for the whole country, let alone the city of Detroit.
Judge Giovon worked in the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, named for his character in the play.
This was really a legal landmark, made possible by Judge Frank Murphy, who was a person who respected the rights of the accused and the oppressed and minorities before it was popular to do so.
So much has changed since the Sweet trial. So why does Brenda Perryman think the play is relevant today?
Because you learn from history. You learn how to avoid repeating history. You can take something good from this.
And you can see a very interesting play.
Wow. Yeah, that takes me back, but it was a good show. And we did it a couple of times, in fact. Hopefully we can do it just prior to the opening of the museum to get everybody even more excited. Because back in the, like we said, this was 1925, and there was no social media. It was none of that, but it was international news.
Yeah, they called it the shot that was heard around the world.
Absolutely. And not only that, it was James Weldon Johnson
My goodness.
who got Clarence Darrow,
Oh, yeah.
the great attorney,
Yeah.
to be the attorney, the main attorney for the Sweet family and the rest of the defendants.
Yeah, so that story goes that Clarence Darrow had just tried the Scopes
trial, the monkey
the theory
trial.
of evolution, and he was in New York. So James Weldon Johnson, who was the executive director of the NAACP, along with Walter White and Spingarn, went to meet with Clarence Darrow, and they had a conversation about the entire incident. Darrow asked them, well, did he actually fire into the mob? So they talked around that question because they didn't know where he was going.
Right.
And then he brought that question back and asked them again, did he fire into the mob? And reluctantly and hesitantly, they said, yes, he did. And that's when Darrow said to them, well, I'll take the case, because no man is worth defending if they're not willing to defend their house as well as their family.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And he came to Detroit, and there's a lot of little drama surrounding Clarence
yeah.
Darrow
Oh, yeah.
himself.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
he was something. But I went into the archives of Clarence Darrow. They're at the University of Minnesota, and in those archives they had scripts, testimonies, trial testimonies and everything, transcripts. And not only that, they had, there was a news reporter who had interviewed many of the people surrounding the trial, even the prosecutors. He was Gladys and then Otis. He gave such great descriptions of them, and I was able to form my characters around those descriptions also, because Gladys, Dr. Sweet's wife, she did not grow up poor.
That's correct. That's correct. She grew up middle class. Her family were well-to-do. I think they lived on, I forget the name of the street, but they lived in the Black Bottom. but they were a prominent family. In fact, when Dr. Sweet and Gladys got married, and when they came back from Europe, they lived with the Mitchells at that particular time.
Yes, so the other thing about the trial, everyone, if one person was found guilty,
That's right.
all of them were guilty.
That's right. That's right. You know, they interviewed Thomas Chalky, who was was the prosecutor, and after the case, the one thing that he admitted was he knew that it was going to be very difficult.
Well, Tom's was.
I'm sorry, Tom's. It was
yeah,
Tom's. That's
yeah.
right. Thank you
Chalk
for correcting
was. He was on the
He
defense
was working on the
team.
defense with Darrell. That's correct. Tom's was the prosecutor, and they asked him, said, "Well, what were your thoughts about that particular trial in that case?" He said, "Man, we were dead in the water because one of the challenges was that everybody that we brought up as defense witnesses were just intellectually inferior to the Sweets and all of those folk. They just talked about, he reveled about the way they presented themselves. That's Dr. Sweet, Henry Otis, and the rest of the folk, and their ability to articulate the King's English. They were very astute, and they represented what W.B. Du Bois called the talented tenth in a very noble and charismatic manner."
Right, right. And they had the witnesses.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the witnesses who were outside at the time. You could just, prejudice was all over them.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Oh, yeah.
And here it was an all-white male jury. And the first trial ended in a hung jury.
That's right. That's right. The first trial ended in a hung jury, and as a result, Frank Murphy threw the case out.
And here was
declared it a
another
mistrial.
thing that was interesting, and I'm sure you remember this, that as the jurors deliberated, they actually got into fights in the jury room. That first jury got into fights in the jury room. They said chairs were being thrown and all of that.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
Frank
yeah.
Murphy, see, the thing I liked about Frank Murphy was he wanted a fair trial.
That's right. That's right. And you know, when this case came up, no one wanted to touch it. No attorney, no judge wanted to deal with this particular case because they thought that it was political suicide. And it was Frank Murphy, in his young brilliance, if you will, who decided to take that case, and it was the catalyst or the launching board for his entire career. He became later the mayor of the city of Detroit, the governor, an attorney general, and then a Supreme Court justice.
Right, appointed by Franklin Roosevelt.
FDR, the New Deal.
I know. He was, once I did so much research on him, he was a red-headed Irish man.
That's right.
And loved his mother.
Yeah.
I don't know if he ever was married.
No, he was not.
No, I didn't think so. But he was just fabulous. He insisted.
Yeah.
Amongst the climate here in Detroit at the time, he insisted that it be fair.
That's right.
So here they had to go through another trial.
Yeah. You know, and the second trial was very much like the first, but this time they tried Dr. Sweet's brother Henry. The prosecution decided to come up with a strategy to try them individually with the hopes of convicting at least one person. But after that particular case, the jury came back and declared Henry as not guilty.
Absolutely. And the way I did it in the play, and I told you about this, I set the actual witnesses in the audience with the audience. So you come in, you sit down, you didn't know who you were sitting next to. And then the clerk would call the name of the witness, and this person would get up in character and walk up on the stage. And as you saw in the video, the stage was up there, and they testified. And I did that because I wanted the audience to feel like they actually were in the courtroom.
Yeah. I think that that's important to be able to transform the mindset of the folk when you do that play. And I'm hoping that we can get it coordinated so that when we open it up and have the grand opening for the museum, that we can do the play simultaneously. Because with the house, what we're doing now is we've done a little work.
Right.
And what we'd like to do by the time we open the house is to transform it so that every person that comes into the home, when they come in, it'll be an experience and it'll be transformative in terms of them having an opportunity to really feel and sense what occurred in 1925 on that corner of Garland and Charlottesville.
And I appreciate you allowing me to come in and tour the house. And it was really a bigger house than it looked like from the outside.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's a much bigger house. And it's going to be so interesting when people, when they walk through the door, really, they should be transformed into that 1925 period.
Yes.
And imagine themselves being put upon, because like I said in the video, cars were parked 3 deep and the police allowed it to be so.
That's right. That's right. As we stated earlier, there was a large population of the members of the Ku Klux Klan, and many of them were police officers.
Yes.
And that's why they allowed for that type of behavior to continue to go on without policing it.
And they marched the suites and everybody in the house out the back door.
Yes.
And put them in a paddy wagon, took them down there and left them in jail. No bail.
Yeah, no bail. And when you think about it, it had to have been disheartening. I mean, obviously, but Dr. Sweet did everything right. He did what the Constitution, he did what is required of an American. He went to school. He went to Wilberforce University, got his undergraduate degree. He went to Howard University and then got his degree in medicine. He went over to Europe to study the impact of radiation to the human anatomy under Madame Curie. He and his wife Gladys got pregnant, and of course she delivered a child, and they went to an American hospital. They were denied. That had to be disheartening. And then when they came back home to Detroit to experience that type of thing, Dr. Sweet, he started his profession at Dunbar Hospital, and Dunbar Hospital had opened in 1918.
Right.
One interesting note about Dunbar Hospital is the fact that one of the founders of Dunbar was Albert Clegg. That's the grandfather of the Wayne County executive, Warren C. Evans. So when we had our event...
But was he related to Reverend Clegg?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Reverend Clegg was his son.
Right, right.
Who started the Shrine of the Black Madonna.
And then Pearl Clegg was the daughter of Reverend Clegg. But he changed his name to...
well, his dad is an Evans.
Yes.
So the CEO's middle name is Clegg.
Okay.
It's Warren Clegg Evans.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was very interesting. I had an opportunity to pull up a newspaper article. I think it was back in the 80s, and they were talking about Dunbar Hospital and how significant it was because, in 1918, you had about 30,000 African Americans who lived in Detroit, and there was no form of health care. There were about 30 physicians, black physicians, who lived in the city of Detroit at that time. And, they were progressive enough to understand the importance of quality health care, and they opened up that hospital, Dunbar Hospital, which is on Frederick Street, right in Midtown.
Right.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, too. If somebody had a bad accident or they were really, really ill, they could get into one of the white hospitals, but just to get over that piece of crisis, and then they send them right back to Dunbar.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. And even afterwards, when later in Dr. Sweet's career, he opened his own hospital. It was Good Samaritan Hospital.
Yes.
I don't know exactly where it was located,
yes.
But he did. He opened his own hospital. But unfortunately, this case really took a lot out of he along with his family. As you are aware, he lost his daughter, Iva, to tuberculosis. He lost his wife, Gladys, to tuberculosis. And later on, Henry His baby brother died of tuberculosis, of the which they contracted
While they
when
were
they
in
were in
jail.
jail. Yeah.
Yes, while they were in jail. It was so sad because even when we did the play and they found him not guilty, the audience went crazy, excited.
Yeah.
But Dr. Sweet, the young man who played Dr. Sweet, Brandon Williams, he said, "Oh, we reveled that time." But then he went on to tell the story of what happened. And he said, "I was never the same again." And wasn't that right?
That's correct. That's correct. You know, a young lady by the name of Jackie Spots is a dear friend of mine who happens to be Dr. Sweet's niece. And she gives vivid stories about how when she was a little girl, where the adults would be sitting in the room and they would be whispering. And when the kids would come in, they would stop talking. This was no badge of honor for them. In Bartow, Florida, they probably suffered the most because they owned an orange grove, and the orange grove burned down. They suspected it was a result of the whole murder trial and Dr. Sweet being triumphant. And it just had a tremendous impact. When his wife died, he remarried, but he could never get over the hump in terms of forging a relationship. He had a child out of wedlock, which he was sued for, and he had to pay child support for that particular child. And then in 1960, after failing in business, after a stint of running for the president of the Detroit chapter of the NAACP, failing that, running for state representative, failing in that particular endeavor, he took his own life.
Right.
He shot himself above
Right.
his office, and they found him dead.
Yes, I mean, it's such a tragedy amidst the triumph, the tragedy that occurred.
Yeah.
See, people sometimes don't realize amidst trying to get that triumph, the things you have to go through have an indelible impact on you.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
And your father, let's talk about your father buying the house.
So that was a very interesting story. My mom and dad in 1958, they lived on Continental Street in Jefferson, which is probably about a mile east of where the Sweet House is located. One morning, they got up to go to Paul's Cut Rate Drugs, downtown Detroit on Broadway, because my sister was sick. So they went down there to get some medicine. So instead of driving all the way down Jefferson to downtown, they took a shortcut, made that right-hand turn down St. Jean, and when they got to Charlevoix, they made the left and went on down. They got to the intersection of Garland and Charlevoix, and my mother looked up and she said, "Herbert, that's the house I dreamed about," referring to the Sweet House. She said, and my father said, "Nez, what are you talking about? That house right there." She said, "That's the house I dreamed about." He said, "Do you know whose house that is?" She said, "No." So they pulled over. My mother jumped out the house. She scurried around the house, looking in the windows as if her life depended upon it, trying to see the inside of it. She couldn't, but when they went to the back, it would be by divine providence that back door was open.
Really?
They walked in the house. My mother went upstairs. She went in the basement. She went through every room.
Nobody was in there?
Nobody was there. It was abandoned at that particular time, but it was up for sale. So she looked at my father and she said, "Herbert, I dreamed about this house. This is the house that I dreamed that we raised our family in." And my father looked at her and said, "Okay, Nez, I understand." So he went out, got the money, put $2,000 down on the house. It was sold to him for $15,000, $3,500 less than what Dr. Sweet paid for it in 1925.
Isn't that something?
And, they
And this
paid
was
for it.
1958.
This was 1958, and they paid $150 a month on land contract for that house. And I am so grateful. We were just talking before we came in here, and we were talking about how we have no control over whose womb we're placed in, but God saw fit that I was the child of William and Ruby Baxter, who purchased the house on the corner of Garland and Charlevoix in 1958. because of what Dr. Sweet did in 1925. While he never had the opportunity to realize the promise of liberty, the promise of happily ever after, I had an opportunity to experience that growing up in the 70s and 80s. My life, when I look back on my life and everything that went on the corner of Garland and Charlevoix, is live and in living color. It was a beautiful experience. There's many times that I tried to stand in that intersection or look out that window and try to imagine what that mob looked like and what that peculiar fear felt like. But no matter how much I tried, I knew that I would never feel that feeling that Dr. Sweet felt or anyone else felt who lived in that house, because of the fact that I didn't live at that particular time, and he did the work necessary in order for me
you to live there. And remember, the house was built in 1919, so it's 100 years
100
old.
years old. Yep, absolutely.
Amazing.
Isn't that incredible?
It is so amazing. And the history, so your family told you the history of the house. How did you find out?
So they would talk about it pretty regularly, but as a kid, you're not really paying attention. But in 1975, we were sitting at the kitchen table eating lunch. Doorbell rang. My mother went to the door, came back, and told my dad that the guy from the newspaper was outside and he wanted to do an interview. My father vehemently turned down that opportunity, and my mother said, "Well, Herbert, somebody got to talk to the man." So my dad said, "Send Danny. Let him go." Now, I'm 10 years old, right? So my mother asked me, did I want to go out? So I went out there, sat on the front fence, and the guy asked me what my name was. I told him. He said, did I know what the history was? I said, yes. A black guy used to live here, and he killed a white guy. He didn't go to jail. That's all I knew, right? So he smiled at me, asked a couple of more questions, and he took a picture and left. That following Monday, when I went to school, my teacher, Miss Dorothy Barnes, stood before the entire class and said, "Hey, everybody, we got a celebrity in the house."
Oh, my God.
So I'm looking around. I'm like, who is she talking about? Who's here? And then she takes this newspaper and she opens it up, and there's an article that says not much has changed since the 1925 trials. And in the middle of the article was the photo that the reporter took of me just that previous week.
Wow.
Ms. Barnes asked me to stand up before the classroom. They asked me 100 questions, of which I didn't have answers for. But when I got home, I asked my mother a million questions, and she opened up this briefcase that had all of these newspaper articles about
Wow.
Dr. Sweet, about the history of
Do
the
you
house.
still have those articles?
I don't have them. However, I have access to them. There's this website called newspapers.com, and you can go on there and pull up every last one of those articles, and I have.
Wow, amazing, amazing. Now, we have some pictures, we have some photos of an event you had at the house,
Yes.
I believe. And as soon as he could put those up, so people could see some of the inside of the house. And then, yes, in fact, I took that picture.
Oh,
that's
a
one.
nice one.
Yeah, that's one that I took of the dining room and the living room of the house. And oh, there's me.
you. Oh, looking all
you
glam.
you took that picture of me. Oh, Lord
That's a
have
good
mercy.
picture.
But imagine, an artist, that's all we do is imagine.
Yeah.
And
That's the living room and dining room.
yes. And like I said, that's a big house.
Pretty
And
nice
you
house.
have a Victrola
Oh, yeah, yeah.
there.
Yeah,
That was me standing in front of the house.
that's a nice pic.
And but we have a whole thing with 25. Oh, there's you and me.
All right.
Uh,
That's your
stand-
grandson.
Yeah, he took that
that
picture.
picture.
Uh-huh,
Yes,
he took that picture. But we should have some more, too, of the ones. Tell us about the reception you had.
So on September
We
the
should
8th,
have another set, the 25 photos.
on September the 8th, we had a reception at the house. to kind of celebrate the occasion. It was the 89th anniversary of Dr. Sweet moving into the home.
Oh, there's some pictures.
And we invited all of the black attorneys and judges in the city of Detroit. They came over. I had a couple of keynote speakers. I had Elliott Hall.
Yes.
I had our
Warren
Wayne County
Evans
executive, Warren Evans. I had the judge.
William Giovanni was there.
William Giovanni was there, but he wasn't a speaker. He was
Right.
he was your character who played. He played the
Right.
character of Dr. Sweet.
Of Frank Murphy.
Frank Murphy, correct. And that day, we just talked about and rehashed the story of Dr. Sweet, and we talked about the Ocean Sweet Foundation on Urban Diversity.
Whose
which-
bedroom was that?
That was Dr. Sweet's bedroom. And we talked about the foundation and its intent and purpose. There's a three-pronged purpose. One is education and scholarship. The other part is political participation and home ownership, and understanding the importance and value of what it means to own a home and care for that home. Also, we gave out an award, which was the Ocean Sweet Legacy Award, and we gave that to longtime attorney Cornelius Pitts.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah. So that was an exciting day. Next year, we'll open up the house officially right around September 8th or 9th as a museum. In 2017, we received $500,000 scholarship.
Dr. Sweet and his wife.
$500,000 grant
Gladys.
from the National Park Service. Mayor Mike Duggan and his administration, along with Butch Hollowell, assisted us in obtaining that particular grant. So we're really excited about what's happening on the corner of Garland and Charlevoix, and we're hoping that everything that we do moving forward will be a banner for that community.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And here, you're trying to raise more funds, right?
absolutely.
Let's tell the audience what's happening.
So the funds that will be raised, that we receive from the National Park Service, is exclusive to the restoration of the home. But the other part of it is we want to put together a interactive educational center
Absolutely.
in the basement, whereby people will be able to, after they tour the house, go to the basement and learn more about the era, 1920s, what was going on, what role did Henry Ford play to this event that occurred on September 8th. Let's talk about the first Great Migration and its implication to the city of Detroit. Let's talk about the mayor who ran for the member of the Ku Klux Klan who ran for mayor at that particular time. And then let's talk about all of the players who played a role in that particular case, whether it was W.B. Du Bois, whether it was James Weldon Johnson, Dr. Sweet, Clarence Darrow, Thomas Chalky, or Toms, who was the prosecutor. Learn more about these folks.
In fact, William Giovanni, who played Frank Murphy, he told me that he had once met Toms. Who was the prosecuting attorney. I mean, he tried to put those folks in jail.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're excited about some of the things that we're doing. Also, we're going to, I have commissioned a muralist
Yes,
who's
yes.
going to do a rendering in the staircase going upstairs that will basically express Dr. Sweet's journey from Bartow, Florida, to the day that he was on the witness trial and being emancipated, if you will, from this particular horrific event that occurred.
And Dr. Sweet was sent up north early.
Oh yeah, he
well,
was a
people-
teenager.
Yeah, because of after what he saw and everything, his father got him up, and he went to Wilberforce,
Wilberforce, that's
and
right.
he was at Wilberforce. He did some high school there or something like that.
He did.
Yes,
He went to high school.
And he
at
worked.
Wilberforce and college. And he worked, that's correct. And that's how he was introduced to Detroit. because he worked on the riverboats
Right.
as a porter. And that's when he learned about Detroit. He learned about the black community. He learned about Paradise Valley. He learned about all of those elements that made Detroit attractive for a young, aspiring physician.
Well, what I envision is us doing the play and refamiliarizing or familiarizing, bringing it to light to many about what happened, and to generate even more interest internationally and nationally, so it would be one of those points that people come to Detroit to view that museum. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, one of the interesting things, as you were saying that, I remember also in 2016 or 17, they were producing the actual movie Arc of Justice.
Right.
David Oyewu was casted as Dr. Sweet, and
Russell
Russell Crowe
Crowe
was casted as Clarence Darrow. The finances kind of got bad, and as a result, they had to postpone it. So we're hoping that everything that we do will inspire them to,
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, like I said, I lived with this
Yeah.
as I was writing the play, I lived, and I love research, and just to go beyond that book, Arc of Justice, to go beyond it and just find out other things about these people and Dr. Sweet. And he had so many challenges, though. After he got his education, like you say, he did go to Europe and all of that, but he wanted to be a part of that talented team.
Yes, he did.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, he did. And you know, when you talk to his niece, Jackie Spots, she really puts it in proper perspective. You know, Dr. Sweet, they called him Big Doc. That's what they called him.
They did?
Big Doc. Because he was the patriarch of the family. Everything that occurred with the Sweet family had to go through him. On Juneteenth, Dr. Sweet would always gather the family, and he would read Frederick Douglass's What the 4th of July
Oh,
means to the
yes.
Negro.
We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake.
There it
The
is.
healing of
There
this
it is.
nation must be quickened.
Go
But
ahead,
anyway,
girl.
oh, yeah.
I know if there is no struggle, there is no progress.
I know. It's a longer
Yeah,
piece
yeah,
than that.
yeah, I know.
And I
Yeah.
made my speech students learn that speech
wow.
every year, you know. It was one of those, his and the Thomas Paine, The Crisis, those speech about freedom and what we have to do.
Yeah.
And Frederick Douglass said, we need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake.
That's
We
right.
got to shake this nation up.
That's right.
Okay, so how can people find out more, reach out to you?
So I'll be launching my Facebook page, the Ocean Sweet Foundation,
Okay.
next month in January, as well as the website. We'll be doing several events at the house in the coming months, particularly in February during Black History Month. We're doing a partnership with the school across the street, Howe Elementary
Right.
School, where we're going to provide 2 scholarships to 2 of the students who write doing the essay challenge. But there'll be more information forthcoming as we move forward and closer
Well,
to
just
the
let
grand
me
opening.
know, because you know I'm in this fight with you.
I know you are, and I appreciate that.
Oh, I just love this whole thing, the idea. I'm
See,
passionate.
I'm putting my hand on my head because I'm so comfortable over here with you.
Well, that's important.
Yeah.
That's important because we want the world to know, and it's important too that our young people know the history of what has happened here.
Yes, yes, yes. We have to understand. I think that one of the challenges that we experience is that we don't know about our history, or we forget it or take it for granted.
We take it for granted.
And as such, we don't learn from it. I think that 2 of the characters in history that have impacted me the most was probably Frederick Douglass and Malcolm X, because they represented and demonstrated what black male imagery should look like.
Absolutely. Well, Daniel Baxter, This has been my treat, my pleasure. After all these years, us getting together here and talking about this, and we're going to continue because I'm going to have you back.
Okay.
So we can update on what's
Yes,
going
absolutely.
on all the way up until the opening
Yeah,
and
I
beyond.
look forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, anytime.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, stay tuned for Table Talk. We're going to talk a little about that Kid Rock thing, which I don't know. And some other things. Kamala dropped out the race and so forth. But I hope you enjoyed the show. He knows so much about the history, and we'll follow up.
All right.
Stay tuned for Table Talk.